Hello, Valeriy Viktorovich. Hello. Hello, dear viewers, audio listeners, comrades in the studio. Today is the 9th of June, 2025 year. And today's questions we have are related to the Trump team. So, Arsen and Andriy are asked to comment on the skirmish between Musk and Trump. What is it? A performance for the public, or the country officials intercepted the mask on their side? For the second week now, we have been observing a quarrel, in quotation marks, between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Out of every iron, Musk declared this, Trump declared that. Then they are friends, then now messages are coming that they are no longer friends. Valeriy Viktorovich, is this a maneuver of the series You Can't Prevent, headed? What really lies behind this performance? Well, they pay attention that in an interview with Anis Kazimirovich Petkis from the 29th of May, you stated the following, quote, "The Trump team did not begin to crumble at all." Valeriy Viktorovich, how will you get out this time? But, first of all, I never get out of it, and I won't get out of it this time either. But the events that are taking place with the Trump team, they give both the opportunity and the need to address the topic of revealing the system and structure of governance in crowd elite societies. And in this regard, first of all, it is necessary to turn to the works of the internal predictor of the USSR, such as cadres decide everything. These are the principles of the personnel policy of the state, anti-state and public initiative. This is a fundamental and very important work, but it is possible to fully understand it only when there are mastered questions. What is the state? The state supranational administration, the state, design, historical states, other issues related to the state, which are set out in the three-volume War of the State. Bolshevism and the book State Symbols and State Sovereignty. These works in the complex will give a sufficient understanding of what is really happening. And in this situation, I must say that there is no performance between this scandal of Trump and Musk. This is not a scandal at all, not even close. Everything is very serious here. But at the same time, I repeat, the Trump team is not pouring. And this scandal, as such, does not pose a big threat to the Trump team. To understand all this, you need to understand, but what, in fact, is the Trump team? Here, from the work of the internal predictor of the USSR on the principles of the personnel policy of the state, anti-state and public initiative, the question directly follows, what if there is a state administration, and there is some kind of anti-state administration? And what is this anti-state management? Anti-state governance is represented by the so-called mafia, clan corporate groups, which are formed into crowds in an elite society to achieve their narrow clan corporate goals at the expense of the state and society. And that is why there are mafias, clan corporate groups. It's just that the mafia is a somewhat Philistine concept, and it is a somewhat narrowed concept. Despite the fact that we now have Vlasovites who are trying to build a state on the basis of the mafia and somehow implement it. So, if there are mafias who, at the expense of the state, want to solve their narrow clan corporate interests, achieve them, then the whole society has a task to form such an impact on the state so that public interests are achieved.
сформировать такое воздействие на государство, чтобы достигались общественные интересы.
And
И
in
в
Russian,
этом
it is
языке
called
это
sobernost.
называется соборность.
The mafia's
Соборность
conciliarism is
мафии
incompatible in its moral
несовместимы по
principle.
своему нравственному принципу.
The mafia's
Мафии
work to achieve
работают
narrow
для
clan corporate
достижения
goals.
узкоклановых корпоративных целей.
Sobernost is a
Соборность,
public
общественная
initiative that works
инициатива,
to achieve
работает
goals
на
in the interests of
достижение
the whole
целей в
society.
интересах всего общества.
This
Это
is a fundamental
принципиальная
difference.
разница.
And
И
in
в
this
этом
respect, this
отношении
and that influence
уже
is
это
already
и
manifested
то,
in
и
the work,
другое
in the
воздействие
functioning of the state
проявляется
itself.
в работе, в функционировании самого государства.
When we are
Когда
told that it
нам
is necessary
говорят
to
о
build
том,
everything through the
что
mafia,
надо
we need
строить
to
все
remember the
через
times that were
мафию,
very close for the
то
Soviet Union,
нужно
for Russia.
вспомнить совсем близкие для Советского Союза, для России времена. А
Namely,
именно,
in the final of the
финал
Soviet Union
Советского
and in the
Союза
functioning of the
и
Russian state in the initial period of the 90s, in its bright form.
функционирование российского государства в начальный период 90-х годов в его ярком виде.
And it
И
was
именно
then, in the
тогда,
90s, that they were saints
в
for someone,
90-е
but for
годы,
the whole
для
people, it
кого-то
was
они
dashing in the
святые, а
90s.
для всего
Mafia
народа
rule
это
was
мессии
fully realized in
90-е
Russia.
годы. В России в полной мере реализовалось мафиозное правление.
Then the clan
Когда
corporate groups, having dismantled the state into parts, solved their tasks at the expense of the whole society. And as a result, the state collapsed, and the entire territory of the state became a raw material appendage of the West, which plundered it.
Государство рушилось, а вся территория государства становилась сырьевым придатком Запада, который его грабил.
And we
И
must
надо
understand
понимать,
that this is a
что
mafia
это
state.
государство мафиозное,
It came
оно
not from
пришло
somewhere, but from the
не
United
откуда-то,
States,
а
were the
именно
clan
из
corporate groupings
Соединенных
of the country
Штатов,
elites of the
где
United States, who were the
кланово-корпоративные
very
группировки
consultants who built a new
страновые элиты
post-Soviet Russia in
США,
our country.
которые
They
и
built it exactly on the
являлись теми
principles
самыми
on which the United States
консультантами,
itself was built.
которые строили у нас новую постсоветскую Россию, они строили ее ровно на тех принципах, на которых строились, собственно, Соединенные Штаты.
That
То
is,
есть
clan corporatism and
кланово-корпоративность
mafia.
и мафиозность.
This
Это
clannish corporatism still
кланово-корпоративность
does not
не
allow the United
дает
States to
до
take
сих
place as
пор
a state.
состояться Соединенным Штатам в качестве государства.
All the
Вся
corruption, all this
коррупция,
vicious state management,
все
which
вот это
manifested
порочное
itself after the
управление
collapse of the Soviet
государством,
Union in
которое
post-Soviet
проявилось
Russia
в
in the 90s, is the
после
refined
крушения
level of the state
Советского
culture of
Союза
the
в
United States.
постсоветской России в 90-е годы, это в рафинированном виде уровень государственной культуры Соединенных Штатов.
This
Это
is fundamentally
принципиально
important to
важно
understand in
понять
order to figure
для
out
того,
what really happened
чтобы
between Donald Trump
разобраться, а
and Musk.
что же действительно произошло между Дональдом Трампом и Маском.
So,
Так
the
вот,
United States as a state did
Соединенные
not exist,
Штаты
does
как
not exist,
государство
and it is
не
still unknown when it will
существовало,
exist, and how it will develop as a state.
и еще неизвестно, когда будет существовать и как оно сложится как государство.
In
В
any
любом
case, the
случае,
United States is a tool
Соединенные
when they
Штаты
say that the United States is a
являются
gendarme.
инструментарием, когда вот говорят, что Соединенные Штаты являются жандармом.
And
А
whose
чьим
gendarme?
жандармом? В
Within the
рамках
framework
какой
of which statehood?
государственности, в
Within the
рамках
framework
какого
of which state,
государства,
public
государственного
administration, the
управления
United States
Соединенные
performs the
Штаты
role of a
выполняют роль
gendarme?
жандарма? Вот
This is the
этот
question you
вопрос
need
надо
to ask
задавать себе
yourself right
сразу
away.
вопрос. Так
So,
вот,
the United States is a tool
Соединенные
created
Штаты
for certain tasks
являются
of solving issues of
инструментарием,
supranational governance.
созданным
within the framework of global policy.
задачи решения вопросов надгосударственного управления в рамках проведения глобальной политики.
Globalization is an objective process, but the management of this objective process, which consists in concentrating the management of productive forces on the planet Earth, is subjective in nature, and there are two concepts of globalization in the limit.
И есть в пределе две концепции глобализации.
One is expressed in the Bible, and you will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. And the second one, which opposes him, is the principles of the Russian world. When all nations live in harmony and complement each other in the way that is provided for from above. And if you are the first, and you will rule over many peoples, they will not rule over you. This is the principle of fascism. Then the principles of the Russian world are Bolshevism. And these two principles are incompatible with each other. Hence the West's hatred of Russia. Age-old hatred. The millennial West has been waging war against Russia. Russian fascists, who are creating centers for the propaganda of fascism at the expense of the state, are fighting the Russian world, the Russian people, and Russian Bolshevism. Russian fascism ideologist Ilyan bluntly said that no fascism can be instilled in the Russian people because it contradicts their culture. So, in order to plant fascism as it is all over the world, and it is necessary to change the culture of the Russian people, so that there is one principle of globalization who owns whom. The United States for 200 years as a state could not have developed by definition. The United States was inhabited by diverse, so to speak, multicultural societies, diverse languages.
Племенными, так сказать, разнокультурными обществами, разноязыкими.
In other words, people who could not realize themselves within the framework of European states left Europe for the United States.
Которые не смогли себя реализовать в рамках европейских государств.
And these people, as a rule, are the working population. They went, as it were, to free lands in order to grow bread there, raise animals, and, as it were, be able to live with dignity within the framework of the culture that they brought with them. But there were others who, having entered into confrontation with states and societies in Europe, left, went to new lands in America, in order to create new opportunities for their existence there.
Уезжали на новые земли в Америку для того, чтобы там создать новые возможности для своего существования.
In this regard, there is an interesting dialogue in the film Patriot, where it means this English colonizer, who is fighting against the Americans who have already rebelled, who have grown up there for several generations. Americans who want to separate from their metropolis from Great Britain, he says that he is ready to commit some crimes there. Well, there they are specifically according to the film they are present, but he understands perfectly well that he cannot return to the UC in this, although this is a lie.
Он прекрасно понимает, что в этом он не может вернуться в Великобританию, хотя это ложь.
The British have committed other crimes, but they could always return to Britain. Now, but for this, here, he should receive some benefits here in the United States. In other words, criminals of various kinds went to the United States in order to get some kind of status there, exploiting the local population and local resources, not understanding what a state is.
Не понимая, что такое государство, получить какой-то статус.
But as a result of this, they were forced to participate with those who were migrant workers and those who are criminals. They participated in the construction of some kind of statehood in order for this management to go on.
какой-либо государственности для того, чтобы шло это управление.
This
Очень
is
хорошо
described
это
very well in
описано
various American westerns.
в различных американских вестернах.
Right
Вот
now, the
сейчас
popular books of Louis L'Amour,
популярные
based on which the film Fast
книги
and Dead was
Луиса
shot.
Лемура, по которому, кстати, снят и фильм «Быстрый и мертвый».
The film is such a pass-through in terms of this.
В плане
The description
описания
of the
вообще
sociology of
социологии
life of the
жизни
population in general,
населения,
except
кроме
for one
одного
point,
момента.
the role of a criminal group
Роль
in organizing the life of the
преступной
population of the town
группировки
is
в
described very
организации
specifically.
жизни населения городка описано предельно конкретно.
In other
То
words,
есть,
in fact, the
фактически,
entire construction of
всё
statehood was based on
построение
various gangs.
государственности шло на основе различных банд.
This, by the
Это,
way, is
кстати,
very well
очень
described,
хорошо
shown in the
описано,
westerns of the Defa
показано
Film Studio.
и в вестернах киностудии Дефа.
Here,
Вот,
the Gur Film Studio.
ГДРовской киностудии.
But
Ну
the
и
Americans
сами
themselves also
американцы
describe the presence of
тоже
gangs well.
присутствие банд они описывали хорошо.
Let's
Вспомним,
recall, for
например, культовый
example,
фильм
the cult
«Банды
film
Нью-Йорка».
gangs of New York. But
Но
what is
что
very
очень
important
важно,
with such a management
при такой
organization, the role of a
организации
leader is very
управления
important.
очень важна роль лидера.
Killing the leader
Убийство
leads to the collapse of the
лидера
controlled group.
приводит к распаду управляемой группировки.
And
И
in
в
this
этом
regard, this
отношении
understanding is expressed
в
very well in
американском
American cinema.
кинематографе вот это понимание выражено очень и очень хорошо.
Take,
Взять,
for
например,
example, the film The
фильм
Fifth Element, also a
«Пятый
cult one.
элемент», тоже культовый такой.
Who's
Кто тут у вас
negotiating here?
ведет переговоры?
We are
Мы
ready
готовы
to
пойти с вами
negotiate
на
with you.
переговоры.
Who's
Кто
in
у вас
charge
тут
here?
главный?
Kills the
Убивает
negotiator.
переговорщика.
That's it.
Всё.
The gang
Банда
scattered.
рассыпалась.
Rather,
Вернее, не
not a
банда,
gang, but this
вот это
managed
вот
community
управляемое
has crumbled.
сообщество рассыпалось. Потому
Because
что
without a
без
leader,
главаря
they are
оно
nothing.
ничего из себя не представляет.
But the
Но
approach
здесь
is
главный
also the
еще и
main one
подход.
here. Look,
Смотрите,
he enters into negotiations, but at the same time
вступает в
kills the
переговоры,
negotiator.
но при этом убивает переговорщика.
This
Это
is
к
to the
вопросу
question
о
of how
том,
American
как
culture even has
американской
negotiations.
культуре вообще существуют переговоры.
Negotiations in
Переговоры в
American
американской
culture, in
культуре
state building,
в
exist
государственном
only to get a
строительстве
temporary
существуют
respite
только
and
лишь
regroup,
для того,
in such a way as to
чтобы
damage the enemy.
получить временную передышку и перегруппироваться таким образом, чтобы нанести ущерб противнику.
At
При
the same
этом
time, the very
само
conduct of
ведение
negotiations,
переговоров,
it does not in
оно
any way counteract,
никоим
or, as it
образом
were, block the
не
negotiator from causing irreparable
противодействует
harm
тому,
to the
как бы
one
не
with whom he is
благоволит,
currently
чтобы
negotiating.
переговорщик причинил невосполнимый вред с тем, с кем он сейчас переговаривается.
That is, if you distract, you can distract with negotiations and destroy the enemy. In American culture, this is the rule that we see in the actions of the Ukrainian regime.
украинского режима.
In other words,
То есть
Ukraine
Украина
does
как
not
государство
exist
тоже
as a
не
state
существует.
either.
Читаем
We read the
работу
works of the state.
государства,
War
война
state
государства,
Bolshevism,
большевизм,
state
государственные
symbols,
символы,
state
государственный
sovereignty.
суверенитет.
Here,
Вот,
to
чтобы понять
understand
вот
this
это
all.
всё.
And
И
then there is the Soviet film His
вот,
Excellency's Adjutant.
есть советский фильм «Адъютант его превосходительства».
And
И
in
в
this
этом
film,
фильме
there is such a
есть
character as Father Angel.
такой персонаж, как батька-ангел.
In
В
this movie,
этом
the gang breaks
фильме
up as soon as the leader is killed.
банда распадается сразу, как только убивается лидер.
But
Но
was the gang of this Father Angel a team of
разве
like-minded people?
банда этого батьки-ангела это была команда единомышленников?
Absolutely not.
Абсолютно нет.
If
При
possible, they
возможности
kill each
они
other,
убивают
guided
друг
by any
друга,
interests that they have personally.
руководствуясь какими-либо интересами, которые имеют лично.
But the
Но
murder of Father
убийство
Angel led to the fact that the gang broke
привело
up.
к тому, что банда рассыпалась.
I am
Все
telling all
это
this
я
because it is necessary to
рассказываю
understand
потому,
that in crowd elite
что
societies,
нужно
built in
понять,
state
что в
administration on the basis of
толпоэлитарных
mafias,
обществах, построенных в государственном управлении на основе мафий,
we are
речь
talking about the
идет о
formation of teams,
формировании
not on the
команд
principle of
не по
like-minded people who
принципу
unite for the sake of some idea,
единомышленников,
but on the principle expressed
которые
in the song,
объединяются
bound,
ради
or rather,
какой-то
bound by one
идеи,
goal, bound by one
а
chain.
по принципу, выраженную в песне, скованные, вернее, связанные одной целью, скованные одной цепью.
But,
Ну, образно
figuratively
говоря,
speaking, on galleys, rowers can have any kind
на
of relationship
галерах
with each other. But as long
гребцы
as they are bound
могут
by
иметь
one goal, it's a
какие
chain, and they
угодно
have an
между
overseer
собой
who forces them to row.
отношения,
They have a goal to
но
somehow free
пока
themselves or
они
obey the will of the
скованы
overseer
одной
who drives
целью,
them and
это
forces them
цепью,
row.
и у них есть надсмотрщик, который заставляет их грести, у них есть цель, чтобы как-то там освободиться. Или же подчиниться воле надсмотрщика, который гонит их, заставляет их грести.
So,
Так
in
вот,
crowd elite societies, teams are formed not on the
элитарных
principle of
обществах
like-minded people, but on the principle of uniting a
команды
common goal.
формируются не по принципу единомышленников, а по принципу объединения общей цели.
And we
И
know
мы
such
знаем
expressions as these:
такие вот
Who are you
выражения:
friends
вы
with
против
here?
кого здесь дружите?
Or the
Или
enemy of my enemy is my
враг
friend.
моего врага мой друг. Вот,
Here
вот
are similar
подобные
expressions.
выражения.
This is
Вот
actually the
это
basis for the
является
formation of various gangs
фактически
and teams in a
основой
crowd elite
для
society based on the
формирования
mafia.
различных банд и команд в толпоэлитарном обществе, основанном на мафиях.
Trump,
Трамп,
coming into his first
придя в
term,
первый
was
свой
forming a team.
срок, формировал команду,
He
ему
was
было
entrusted to
доверено
form the team
формировать
himself.
команду самому.
Choose people with
Подбирай
whom you will work
людей, с
comfortably,
кем
with
тебе
whom you have
будет
mutual
работать
understanding. There are
комфортно,
certain contacts.
с
Whom
кем
you know
у
from work.
тебя есть взаимопонимание, есть определенные контакты, кого ты знаешь по работе.
But the
Но
opposition that Trump has
противодействие, с
faced in
которым
governing the state,
столкнулся Трамп при управлении
although in
государством,
quotation
хоть и в
marks,
кавычках,
but we
мы
consider it,
считаем
or
это
rather,
якобы оно
how would
формально
it
это
formally be
государство,
this state,
Соединенные
the
Штаты,
United States?
он
He
столкнулся
faced
с
such
таким
opposition, which
противодействием,
led to the fact that
которое
Trump was
привело к
forced to
тому,
constantly
что
maneuver,
Трамп
change people,
вынужден был
and leave.
постоянно маневрировать, менять людей и уходить.
He did
Он
not
не
cope with the
справился
task on his
с
own.
задачей самостоятельно.
How can you
Как
cope
можно
with the task on
справиться с
your own?
задачей
Show us the
самостоятельно,
example of the
показывает
sovereign
нам
of Russia,
пример
Vladimir
государя России
Vladimirovich
Владимира
Putin.
Владимировича Путина.
When,
Когда,
remember, when
помните,
his first
когда
presidential
начался
term
его
began,
срок,
he began to pull
первый
people from St.
президентский, он начал
Petersburg,
подтягивать
and then
людей
St.
из
Petersburg.
Петербурга, и тогда вот питерские.
There were
Были
Moscow, there
московские,
were
были
St.
питерские,
Petersburg,
были
there were
определенно
definitely clan
кланово-корпоративные
corporate groupings.
группировки.
There was
Была
also a
еще
group of security
группировка
forces.
силовики.
In
То
other
есть
words, Putin, at his former
по-прежнему
place of work in the
месту
KGB of the
работы
USSR,
в КГБ
somehow had certain
СССР
connections with the
так или
professional
иначе
environment,
имел
and,
определенные
accordingly,
связи с
this professional
профессиональной
environment could
средой,
nominate
и,
him some
соответственно,
managers on whom
этому
he could
эта
rely to one
профессиональная
degree or
среда
another, and who were
могла
managerially
выдвинуть
well off.
ему каких-то управленцев, на которых он мог положиться в той или иной степени и которые были управленчески состоятельными.
As an employee of the St. Petersburg City Hall, he also made many contacts, and he gained some knowledge about who is capable of what, and what kind of relationships he has, and how to build what kind of relationships with whom.
Кто на что способен и какие взаимоотношения у него складываются и как с кем строить какие отношения.
This is fundamentally important for the formation of a team.
Команды.
Let it not be your personal one. not according to the principle of like-minded people, but a workable team. When people will perform their duties, and you can control them and make them work for the interests common to both the state and clan corporate interests.
Контролировать и заставлять работать на интересы общие как для государства, так и кланово-корпоративные интересы.
The main thing is that people are in their place.
Были на своем месте.
And the main thing is that the interaction with the head of state should be such that they are effective in their place.
Они были эффективны на своем месте.
Even if not from the very beginning, but after some time, they could enter the management, as, for example, happened with Miller, who replaced Vyakirov at Gazprom.
Пришел на смену Вяхереву в «Газпром».
He had serious problems at the very beginning, very serious. And he wouldn't have got out of it without Putin, Miller. And if Putin had acted like Trump, he would have had to change Miller. But Putin pushed through the situation, in which Miller remained the head of Gazprom. He solved this problem. Trump did not cope with these tasks. He was torn apart. The approach of managing the business structure did not give him this efficiency. He did not have the necessary knowledge in public administration and work with those who formally, and even openly could resist, including them in public administration. Putin, working in the KGB, has gained such experience how to work with people, not only with your like-minded people, but also with your opponents, so that they work for common goals. Working in the City Hall of St. Petersburg, he gained experience in public administration, and combining these two experiences, he proved to be quite effective in managing the state. When he, forming various coalitions of clan corporate groups in public administration, put these groups together in such a way that Putin turned out to be a key link in these clan corporate relations. Without him, it turned out to be impossible to solve the issues of clan corporate conflicts.
Поставил эти группировки между собой таким образом, что Путин оказался ключевым звеном в этих кланово-корпоративных отношениях, и без него решить вопросы кланово-корпоративных конфликтов оказалось невозможным.
Such an attempt to exist without Putin, during the period when Dmitry Anatolyevich Medvedev was installed, already in the 2008 year, almost led to the fact that gang wars of the 90s could begin, and during Putin's time. As if everyone had become solid gentlemen, they no longer wanted to fight. But Medvedev turned out to be incapacitated by the state administration, and to breed here these clan corporate contradictions. And then it was thought up, and let's throw part of the presidential powers on Putin. Putin will be prime minister, but part of the presidential powers will be on him with someone. But that's not legally possible. Let's make another option that is legally possible. In other words, there is a ruling party that won the elections. The head of this party is given part of the presidential powers, which allow just to solve these conflicts between clan corporate groups. And that was all Medvedev needed. Because this is the area where you can lose your head without a problem, and in the literal sense. How many American presidents have been killed? And here, I repeat, in the 90s, it was the refined American state that was built on these principles only. The American state, having another task, being a gendarme for the whole world, solved the issue of its stability in the state, and maintaining the interclan balance of interclan forces and preventing war due to the fact that these clan corporate groups, and simply put gangs, they were fed at the expense of an external resource.
Что эти кланово-корпоративные группировки, а попросту говоря, банды, они кормились за счет внешнего ресурса.
Look at how the
Посмотрите, как
American state was
строилось
built.
американское государство.
The 19th century, at a time when Europe had already quite begun to build states in which the social sphere, that is, social security, was being formed.
В которых формируется социальная сфера, то есть социальное обеспечение.
In America, they have never even thought about these matters,
Никогда даже не задумывались об этих делах. Ни
neither
о
about
пенсии,
pensions
ни о
nor about social
социальном
security,
обеспечении,
because there were two
потому что
factors.
было два фактора.
The first
Первый
factor is a
фактор
relatively
это
young, able-bodied
относительно
population
молодое,
that needs to work for itself.
работоспособное население, которое должно работать на себя.
The second circumstance was that it was possible to get an additional resource each time due to the absorption of some new territory, some external resource.
За счет поглощения какой-то новой территории, какого-то внешнего ресурса.
In this regard, it should be understood that the ethics of migrants from Europe, human relations more or less emphasize.
Мигрантов из Европы отношения человеческие более или менее, подчеркиваю.
If anyone is interested, please refer to the history of European wars, as certain peoples did during the conduct of European wars. Russian army did not rob, did not rape, did not kill, but recall, for example, the Italian campaign of Alexander Vasilievich Suvorov, when Catholics, Italians fled from their own Italian soldiers, under the protection of the Russian army, because the Russian army did not rob, did not rape, did not kill. And there it doesn't matter who occupied this city, even you liberate your city 3 years, 3 days for you to plunder. Therefore, Catholics and Italians carried children to Orthodox Suvorov so that he would bless them. Here. So, when there are Europeans with such a mentality, who only conditionally accept their fellow citizens, compatriots, there are Italians of Italians, Germans of Germans, Englishmen and Englishmen.
Своих даже сограждан, соотечественников, там итальянцы, итальянцев, немцы, немцев, англичане, англичан.
They only conditionally take them for equals, but whenever possible, they always rob them. What attitude even the hard-working population had towards the Indians? They didn't think of them as people at all. For a long time, there was a dispute in the Catholic Church in general, whether Indians have a soul or not, whether Indians are people or not. Here. So, all the time, there was an absorption of some new resource. And let's remember the development of the Wild West. Why is that? Gold rush. Gangs and various kinds of adventurers go for gold. They are followed by the production sector. But not social security. The state as such does not go. Here. And at this time, European states are being built where social security is already appearing. After that, they are granted Alaska. A new piece of it was torn off by these islands, according to which the Koreans, then North Korea, is which belonged to Russia, which seized. That's it, okay. About the islands. America was constantly capturing something, and she came to the point that she began to pretend that American corporations, clan corporate groups exist. It is necessary to pursue a policy of Pax Americana. When they say, you Europeans don't get involved with us, but we will develop the American continent. But as soon as they absorbed the American continent, they immediately climbed into Europe themselves. In other words, the United States, They were planned as the center of concentration of control of the North American continent. And Brazil was planned as a center of concentration of management of the Southern American continent. But this is with those information technologies. With the development of information technology, the United States received a breakthrough in development due to the fact that more qualified people from European countries arrived there. That is, there was muscle mass to build a state from the supranational level. And the North American United States project took place, but the South American United States did not take place. And that is why the flag that we now have in the United States is still known, and the flag of Brazil. The South American United States has existed as the national flag of Brazil for only 4 days. And it was quickly replaced. So, the United States has always maintained its role as an American gendarme, only because they have been absorbing someone all the time. The last takeover was the territory of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe Socialist. But if everything seems to be more or less well with Eastern Europe, conditionally well for Eastern Europe itself, then the robbery of the territory of the Soviet Union, Greater Russia, was carried out of lawlessness. And it was here that all these clan corporate relations, mafia principles of building the American state were fully manifested. Because there were no checks for Russia to exist as some kind of subject sovereign state. In the United States, in order for the United States to take place as a sovereign subject state, there are always clan corporate associations, one way or another, united into a state, into a single state. In fact, it is a confederation. But nevertheless, since no state is a full-fledged state, this implementation also comes from the supranational level. And that's why they have a State Department, a Secretary of State who works on everything. Here, and therefore, he can only conditionally be considered the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He is like this in relation to all states, and not only in relation to the United States. These states that are part of the United States. They implemented here exactly the model of that 19th century state, when gangs ruled everything here in Russia. Remember those gang wars. Hawaii, islands. So that's it. Trump, even in the face of the fact that the American country elites, who feed exclusively at the expense of robbing the whole world, therefore, they are called globalists. Absolutely not. These are the American country elites. If they are cut off from the consumption of natural resources from all over the world, they will cease to exist. These are the very gangs that are the building blocks of the United States. So, they are not wanting what the global elite is implementing.
что реализует именно глобальная элита.
And the global elite is responsible for the situation on the entire planet Earth, in the sense that each state should have its own function. And in this situation, when Pax Americano with its consumption threatens the existence of the whole world, it should disappear. And an ordinary, albeit a design and engineering state, but an ordinary one, should come in place of the United States. Not the task of the world gendarme, as it is now in the United States, which will not need to adjust resources. So, the American country elite opposed the United States, brought the technologies of the so-called orange color revolutions to the United States. Although the color revolutions, because there were flowers, they're like no color. So, there was a joke, why is a color revolution impossible in the United States? Because there is no United States embassy there. The American country elites, who were the main labor force for the destruction of other states through these color revolutions, they do not know and do not understand what a state is, how to manage it. But working from the supranational level, under the leadership of global elites, they carried out the destruction of other states. And when the confrontation between globalists and country elites arose in the United States, country elites, completely unaware of the nature of states, dragged the technology of color revolutions into the quality of the tools of clan corporate showdowns.
Притащили в качестве инструментария кланово-корпоративных разборок технологии проведения цветных революций.
But even under these conditions, the United States was in a much better position in terms of governance than Putin got Russia at the end of the 20th century.
С точки зрения управления, нежели досталась Россия Путину в конце 20 века.
At that time, in Russia, we were absolutely not restrained by any ties, by any borders. It was mafia management that was carried out.
Границами было осуществлено именно мафиозное управление.
In the mafias, there is another point like this. There is no dynamically distributed responsibilities. That's the functionality. That is why one leader was killed. The gang immediately crumbles. And therefore, one of the principles of mafia management, if you break through somewhere, is to hold on. This is to eliminate everyone who can claim your place. If you do not do this, then you will definitely be served by those who will replace you. Therefore, in the mafia, everyone is always fighting against each other. The only thing that unites them is their opposition to society. That's why the mafia always uses the principle of tying someone up with blood there. Absolutely. And then this bandit group already exists. So if the leader excludes active people from his gang, then he has this gang, it is, in general, small. As far as this leader can manage a large number. That's how much more he can manage, so it will be a big gang. As soon as he gets the gang number beyond his limits, the management crumbles. Therefore, he is always interested in active people who can help him manage. But from active people comes the threat of what will happen to him. he himself will be displaced.
что произойдет с ним самим. Его самого сместят.
In this regard, here again, we are constantly talking about films today. Such a cult film is Gangster Petersburg, the end of the antibiotic. Here is a concrete example, and there are many such examples. So, everything I'm saying now has a direct bearing on what we are generally approaching, the conflict between Musk and Trump.
Тому, о чем вот, мы, в общем-то, подходим, к конфликту Маска и Трампа.
Because without understanding how governance is built, how the state is built, we will not understand what is the essence of this conflict and the prospects for its resolution.
В чем же суть вот этого конфликта и перспективы его разрешения?
So, in the conditions when Trump began to shake the state with orange technologies, the United States was still in better conditions than Putin got Russia, where mafia management completely prevailed, and it was necessary to work with various clan corporate groups, that is, to remove the oligarchs from power.
Кланово-корпоративными группировками, то есть отстранять олигархов от власти.
What is an oligarch in power? This means that various clan corporate groupings, to the best of their abilities, take under their control and for their feeding one or another sphere of the state structure.
И для своего кормления ту или иную сферу государственного устройства.
So remember the famous one? The son of the Minister of Railways, an outstanding railway worker.
Выдающийся железнодорожник.
The son of a banker, an outstanding banker. The father and the son ceased to be the Minister of Railways and immediately ceases to be an outstanding railway worker. In other words, his competencies, his knowledge, skills, and skills immediately disappear somewhere. It is according to this principle that people are appointed in each grouping. This has always been the case with the United States. When each clan corporate grouping, country was allocated one or another place for feeding, one or another sphere of activity, which was transferred from one person to another in this clan, but remained within its clan corporate grouping.
В этом клане от одного человека к другому, но оставалось в пределах его кланово-корпоративной группировки.
This is exactly the meaning of the fact that they have become a congressman. He remains a congressman almost all his life. Who has become a senator remains all his life. That is, if at some stage he has proved his functional capacity and usefulness for the clan, this place is assigned to him. Unless, of course, a person claims more and proves his useful functionality for the clan of a corporate grouping there. Here, at one time, everyone quite undeservedly admired the movie House of Cards. It's an American movie. It was as if the power from within was being shown there. And now it is completely undeservedly forgotten, and it is not watched. This House of Cards, in general, shows the principles of team formation, how government is formed. But since they realized that they had talked about a lot, that is, as if they had said more than necessary, and it was necessary to close this topic, they made a simple move. Remember, there was such a meta movement, where all the protrusion is there is male aggression, that men only think about how to rape women, that it is necessary to resist this male aggression.
Мужчины только и думают, как бы изнасиловать женщин, что надо вот противостоять этой мужской агрессии.
Under this scythe, under this mill, under the millstones of this mill, the main actor of this house of cards, Kevin Spacey, fell. And
И
so
так
you
руками
throw up your
разводишь. Ну
hands.
как
But how could he
вообще-то
actually get
он
into
мог
this?
в это попасть?
After
Ведь
all,
он же
he is
абсолютно
absolutely correct.
правильный.
After
Ведь
all, the Metu
движение
movement
МИТУ
in general
вообще
was
было
simply delighted with
просто в
homosexuality.
восторге от гомосексуализма.
The VT agenda is and still is one of the most significant agendas. It's only under Trump that companies suddenly started to move away from this. And he, in general, ideologically correct, he is a homosexual. And suddenly, he was accused of 15 men who said that he molested them. His career and life were destroyed. He became an outcast, but on the basis of this, the film was removed from the show. Well, how can they show this film in which such a fiend is filmed? In other words, the very topic of team formation in American public administration, even so poorly disclosed in the House of Cards, was redundant that it was removed from the field of view of the entire population. And so now, as if it would be useful for many to review it here in order to understand what it is going on there. And to understand, by the way, the conflict between Musk and Trump, and I repeat, there is absolutely no performance. Everything is absolutely sincere there. But the Trump team, I repeat, is not in danger of any crisis yet. So, Putin, working in much worse conditions, personally turned out to be a high-class manager, a statesman, and was able to form teams so that they worked for the interests of the state. And this, in particular, returning to the topic we were talking about, when Putin became prime minister, and personnel issues were described to him, Medvedev sort of jumped out of them, but Putin retained large-scale state management. Because clan corporate groups no longer wanted to fight, and they could not resolve conflicts among themselves at the mafia level. They needed higher management. But this is a higher management. It is present in Russian culture. And in mafia culture, in American culture, it is completely absent. There needs to be supranational governance. Putin has taken place, and he runs this state. And Trump has shown in his first term that he cannot work with conflicting factions. And then look at how they formed a team for his second presidential term. J. Devens, the vice president, was an ardent anti-Trumpist. At the right moment, he turned out to be for Trump. Rubio is the same. And so on all sorts of points. In other words, in fact, we see a specific supranational management when completely different people are brought together into one team, which is conditionally called the Trump team. And these people have to solve a certain management task. These people may conflict with each other. They may not like each other there, or vice versa. But the question that they can violate the command settings is not even worth it. Pay attention, some entrepreneur is arguing with the president, and at a level that shakes the whole state. And the president, in fact, can't do anything with the entrepreneur. There were conflicts between Putin and the oligarchs, and there were some more. But Putin has never stooped to the level of this market demagoguery. Here Trump, for example, forbade inventing various names for himself, name-calling. He forbade it. That's enough. And what does he do himself? And what do the same Republicans do? But if it's in the American political culture, then it's going to go away. But if you forbid something that you can't stop, but it will come back to you. But he doesn't understand it. And the conflict, this is the sound of it, became possible only because Trump got involved in it. And they began to conduct it publicly.
Трамп в него ввязался, и они начали вести его публично.
In fact, there is no such crisis. I repeat, conditionally, the Trump team does not exist yet.
Повторю, в условно команде Трампа пока не существует.
For one simple reason, that people now, having tried in one of their qualities, move into another quality, like, for example, walls. In other words, I failed in one situation, let's work in another situation, because there are clan corporate interests. But the mask is being made a claim that here he promised $1 billion, I'm sorry, $1 trillion to find where it was stolen. But he only made a few billion.
Найти, где разворовано, а сделал всего-то на несколько миллиардов.
Here. But that's the point of Musk's departure. And I just explained this in an interview with Anis Kazimirovich. That's what angered these clan corporate groups, the mafia.
Разозлили вот эти кланово-корпоративные группировки мафии.
In the United States, the country's elites are so strong that public administration has begun to collapse. And accordingly, it is necessary to extinguish this conflict as much as possible. And therefore, all the activities of this Dodge company were immediately curtailed. And to present results for this company is, as it were, incorrect for the simple reason that it could not achieve this final result because the Dodge activity itself was curtailed. And the problems created when clan corporate groups began to tear up Musk's corporations led to what was needed, in general, to be engaged in saving these corporations themselves.
Кланово-корпоративные группировки начали рвать корпорации Маска, привели к тому, что нужно было, в общем-то, заниматься спасением самих этих корпораций.
Musk is not an easy person in the supranational administration. The announcement and implementation of projects that were developed in the bowels of the American state, but which, as a result of American corruption, have become impossible to execute in the American statehood proper, in the American state, is initiated on it.
Но которые в результате американской коррупции стали невозможны к исполнению в, собственно, американской государственности.
And moreover, everything that was stolen from the Soviet Union, from Russia, is brought to Musk in order to implement it all. Well, for example, the same Starlink and many other options. In other words, Musk is the frontman of such a signboard, behind which there is real management, which implements high-tech processes through Musk's companies.
Через компании Маска реализуют высокотехнологичные процессы.
And accordingly, they need a person to be able to work actively with these programs.
Им нужно, чтобы человек мог деятельно с этими программами работать.
So he was attracted. By the way, Here we have such an
Вот у нас
academician
есть такой
Sakharov,
академик
yes,
Сахаров, да,
who wanted to destroy the
который
United
еще хотел
States, fit two
уничтожить
ships,
Соединенные
blow up,
Штаты, подогнать два
so that the
корабля,
tsunami
взорвать так,
washed
чтобы
away the United
цунами
States
смыло
and hence the
Соединенные
Stalin
Штаты, отсюда
Strait.
пролив имени Сталина.
So
Так
that's what
вот,
our Admiral Savetsky
на что
replied
ему
to him.
ответил
We
наш
are
адмирал
warriors,
советский:
not murderers.
Мы воины, а не убийцы.
Here.
Вот. Так
So
вот,
Sakharov was not an
Сахаров
untalented
был не
physicist, but he
бесталанным
really did not
физиком,
achieve
но
anything.
реально он ничего не добился.
The fact
Дело в
is
том,
that
что
through
через
Sakharov,
Сахарова, за
for
что
which he
получил
received
все
all
свои
his
награды,
awards, the results of
сливались
intelligence activities were
результаты
merged.
деятельности, разведки.
In other
То есть,
words, it was necessary for someone to
нужно
present
было,
them,
чтобы
someone
кто-то
to
их
put these
предъявлял,
results into
кто-то их,
operation in our
эти
nuclear
результаты,
project.
запускал в работу в нашем ядерном проекте.
And
И Сахаров
Sakharov
был как
was
раз
just
одним
one
из
of
тех
those scientists
ученых, за
behind whom the
которым
activities of our special
скрывалась
services were
деятельность
hidden.
наших спецслужб.
That's the
Вот в
point.
чем суть.
Musk's
Маск
presence about the
представляет
same
примерно
situation.
ту же самую ситуацию.
By
Сам по
himself, he
себе
is not
он
untalented,
не
a competent
бесталанный,
enough
достаточно
organizer, but as
грамотный
such,
организатор,
he cannot
но
cover everything and
как
everything that he
таковой
implements
он
in his
не
projects.
может охватить все и вся, что у него реализуется в его проектах.
But
А
those who
вот
put it
те,
up,
кто его
they are interested
поставили,
in
они
ensuring that these high-tech
заинтересованы в том,
projects
чтобы
are
эти
not destroyed.
высокотехнологичные проекты не были уничтожены.
In the
В
confrontation with
противостоянии
the
со
country's
страновыми
elites,
элитами
such an effect is
такой
created.
эффект создается.
And
И
so Musk
поэтому
had to be
Маска
removed from
нужно было
public
выводить из
administration,
государственного
because he
управления,
was
поскольку
annoying,
он
and he was
раздражал. И
removed from
его
public
вывели из
administration.
государственного управления.
But how
Но
signally he
как
was brought out.
знаково его вывели.
He was
Ему
presented with a
был
symbolic golden
вручен
key.
символический золотой ключ.
If signs
Если
rule the world,
знаки
we read
правят
the state
миром,
symbol,
считаем
state
государственным
sovereignty.
символом государственный суверенитет.
If we
Но
look at
если
history,
посмотрим
there is always
историю,
some defeated
то
city,
всегда
or someone who
какой-то
recognizes his vassal
побежденный
position
город
before someone.
или
He
кто-то,
hands the
кто
key to the
признает
winner or the overlord.
свое вассальное положение перед кем-то, он вручает победителю или сюзерену ключ.
Previously,
Раньше
it
это
was the
был
key to
ключ
those
от
vaults where some riches lay.
тех хранилищ, где лежали какие-то богатства.
Well,
Ну,
the treasury,
казна,
for
например.
example. And
И
that's why they
потому
gave the
давали
keys to the
ключи
city.
от города.
That
То
is,
есть
from
от
such a
такого
room, from
помещения,
another
от
room,
другого
from a third
помещения, от
room.
третьего помещения.
Then it
Потом
was
это
reborn, and a single
переродилось и
symbolic
стал
key was
предоставляться
provided.
один единственный символьный ключ.
When a person
Когда человек
transfers the right to manage this management object, which he heads, to another
право
person.
управления этим объектом, управления, которое он возглавляет, другому человеку.
Trump hands
Трамп
over a symbolic golden key to the White
передает
House.
символьный золотой ключ от Белого дома.
The
А
White
Белый
House
дом
is
это
considered the
считается
residence of the US
резиденцией
president.
президента США.
In other
То
words,
есть
in fact,
фактически
it is not Trump who is the
это не
leader,
Трамп
but Trump
руководитель,
recognizes Musk's
а Трамп
superiority
признает
by giving him this
превосходство
golden key.
Маска, отдавая ему вот этот золотой
And
ключ.
it doesn't
И
matter that
неважно,
according
что
to this
по
American
этой
tradition,
американской традиции
the president is
президент
sitting and
сидит,
Musk
а
is
Маск
standing.
стоит.
It doesn't
Это
matter.
неважно. Это вообще
This is generally
бескультурно, и
uncultured,
вот
and
эта
in this
ситуация, ну,
situation,
как бы
it is as if it is not
не
considered.
рассматривается.
But look
Вот
at how to
посмотрите,
hold
как
meetings
правильно
correctly.
проводить
This is
встречи.
the sovereign of Russia,
Это
Putin.
государь России Путин.
He
У
always
него
has
всегда
everything
все
checked out.
выверено.
And
А
American statehood, it is
американская
uncultured.
государственность, она бескультурна.
There it is that it is
Там вот
uncultured,
это вот
and it
бескультурие,
manifests
оно и
itself in
проявляется во
everything
всем
and
и всем.
everything.
Но
But the main
главное,
thing at the
на
symbol level was shown
уровне
that there is
символа
no
было
gap between
показано,
Trump
что
and Musk,
никакого
and Musk is
разрыва
recognized by
между
Trump.
Трампом
As a
и
representative of a higher
Маском
supranational
не
force, a higher
существует.
supranational
А
governance.
Маск Трампом признается как представитель более высокой надгосударственной силы, более высокого надгосударственного управления.
And in
И в
this
этом
regard,
отношении
many have asked questions
многие
about how
задавались
Musk behaves
вопросами,
with Trump,
как вот себя
that he
Маск
brings his
ведет
children there,
с
especially his
Трампом,
son,
как,
who
что
freely
он там
plays in the president's
детей
committee
там,
there.
своих, особенно сына одного приводит, вот, который там свободно играет в комитете президента.
And
Это
these
вот
are
как раз
just the
показатели
indicators
всего
of
вот
all
этого.
this. So,
Так вот,
when Musk went to quarrel with Trump, he felt
когда
and feels the power
Маск
behind him.
пошел на ссору с Трампом, то он чувствовал и чувствует за собой силу.
Trump knows
Трамп
this
эту
force.
силу
He counts with it.
знает.
He tried to
Он с ней
maneuver, but the
считается,
mask
он
suffered.
пытался маневрировать. Но Маска понесло.
His one, the other, the third.
Другое, третье.
When they say
Когда
that Trump
говорят о
said
том,
that he would deprive Musk of
что
government contracts.
Трамп заявил о том, что он лишит государственных контрактов Маска.
And that's it.
Маск ответил:
I'm
«А
finishing the Space 10 program.
заканчиваю программу SpaceX.
Dragon ships don't fly anymore. And then what then?
И тогда, что же тогда?
Are we
Мы
becoming completely
попадаем в
dependent on
полную
Russia?
зависимость от России?
How are we going to
Как мы
fly
будем
to the
летать
same
на
IS
ту же
and in
МКС,
general
да и вообще
and
вести
conduct space
исследования
exploration?
космоса? Сейчас
Now, the presence of a fig
наличие
leaf of the
фигового листка
SpaceX program gives the illusion
программы
that the
SpaceX
United States is
дает
independently
иллюзию
engaged
того,
in
что
space
Соединенные
exploration
Штаты
and conducts space programs.
самостоятельно
In fact, they
занимаются
do it all on
освоением
engines
космоса
that
и
Russia
ведут космические
produces.
программы. На самом деле они все это делают на двигателях, которые производит Россия.
Here,
Вот.
and many technologies are not available to Americans who, like, flew to the moon.
Которые типа летали на Луну.
Here,
Вот.
Russia
Россия
has
пережила
survived the
90-е
90s,
годы,
has not
не
lost its
утеряла
space
космических
competencies.
компетенций.
The United
Соединенные
States has been
Штаты
developing
развивались
successfully
успешно
all
все
the time,
время.
but Russia has not lost its
Россия
competence in
не
space,
утеряла
and the
компетенции
United
в
States has not
космосе.
been able to
А
recruit them.
Соединенные Штаты так и не смогла их набрать.
This is
Об
what
этом
we read about the war of the Bolshevik
«Война
state.
государства большевизма».
There
Там
is a
отдельно
separate one
есть
on the
и
moon,
по
and on the
Луне,
Apollo-Soyuz
и по
flight,
полету
and many other
Союз
things.
Аполлон, и много еще чего.
Now,
Так
no
вот,
one can do that.
на это не может пойти никто.
And what
И
happens next?
что происходит дальше-то?
In all of
Во
this,
всем этом.
since we
Раз
are
уж мы
talking about
заговорили
films
сегодня про
today,
фильмы,
it is very useful for everyone to
то
review a very informative
очень
film of the
полезно
Soviet
всем
era.
пересмотреть
This is just the
очень
year of Brezhnev's
содержательный
death.
фильм советского времени. Это как раз год смерти Брежнева.
Traffic Police
Инспектор
Inspector
ГАИ
Soviet.
советский.
A film
Фильм,
that reflected a very deep
который
essence of the state of the
отразил
Soviet
очень
Union.
глубокую суть государственное состояние Советского Союза.
He
Он
reflected the
отразил
correlation of the
там
state system, the structure of the state and the mafia, and public initiative.
системы государства, структуры государства и мафии и общественной инициативы.
That's what's
Вот
in this movie.
что в этом фильме?
The Soviet
Советский
Union,
Союз
according to its
по
announcement,
своему
was a nationwide
оглашению
state
до
until
самого
the very
конца
end.
являлся государством общенародным.
Accordingly,
Соответственно
one way or
этому,
another,
так
as a
или
result of these set
иначе,
principles, there was a
сохранялись
certain
в
opportunity to make a
результате
career
вот этих
for any person who is
принципов
professionally wealthy
сохранялась
and capable of
определенная
some kind of
возможность
professional activity.
сделать карьеру любому человеку, который является профессионально состоятельным и способным к какой-то профессиональной деятельности.
But
Но
in this
в
system
этой
of a nationwide
системе
state, there is no
общенародного
place for the mafia
государства
from the word at all.
мафиям места нет от слова совсем.
Systemically, the
Системно
mafia is not present
мафия
in this state
не
because it is denied.
присутствует в этом государстве, поскольку оно отрицается.
In other
То
words,
есть
the mafia
мафия не
cannot enter the
может
structure of the
зайти в
state as an
структуру
independent tool
государства
for
как
solving national
самостоятельный
tasks.
инструмент для решения общегосударственных задач.
We recall the
Вспоминаем
90s, when we
90-е
had some
годы,
kind of
когда
industry
у нас
assigned to
за
every
каждым
oligarch in Russia.
олигархом была закреплена в России
And,
какая-то
for example,
отрасль.
the
И, например,
Khodorkovsky Ministry of
Ходорковский
Transport
Минотеп
was in charge of the
руководил
government
вообще
in general.
правительством.
In
То
other
есть
words,
выплачивал
he paid
зарплату
salaries to the
правительству.
government.
Люди,
People
которые
who worked in the government,
работали в
due to the
правительстве,
fact
из-за
that
того,
small
что
salaries were forced to leave,
маленькие зарплаты вынуждены
Minotep
были
put his
уйти,
own people.
Минотеп поставил своих людей,
And while you
и
receive a salary
пока
from
ты
the
получаешь
Minotep,
зарплату
you
от
are a member of
Минотепа,
the
ты
government,
член
a
правительства,
minister.
министр. А
And
если
if you
ты
violate the clan's
нарушаешь
corporate interests,
корпоративные
that is,
интересы,
you no longer work
то есть
for the
ты
mafia,
больше не
you no
работаешь
longer
на
hold this
мафию,
position.
ты больше не занимаешь эту должность,
You
ты
quit
моментально
immediately.
увольняешься.
Putin had to do a lot to change this situation. And so now the enemies of Russia are throwing up their hands. Oh look, Putin has suspended all the oligarchs. So, in Soviet times, clan corporate groups, mafias, could not enter the structure of the state, because the system of the national state itself rejected them.
Потому что сама система общенародного государства их отторгала.
But in a crowd of elite society, clan corporate interest is present.
Кланово-корпоративный интерес присутствует.
And the destruction of the Soviet Union went precisely through the creation of various mafias, and such cases as the Uzbek case, which was promoted by Glyan and Ivanov.
Узбекское дело, которое раскручивали Глян и Иванов.
Here, they didn't fight against the mafia so much as they spurred it on.
Сколько подстегивали это.
Here is the Elisevsky store. These are all elements of the presence of the mafia in public administration. But, I repeat, neither at the systemic nor at the structural level did they have access to the state. But since they are present in society, they somehow had an impact. And the more the state itself was eroded, the principles of building a nationwide state were eroded, the more functional the mafias became. And in this film, The Traffic Police Inspector, we seem to observe a personal conflict between two people. One is a traffic police inspector principled, who, based on the letter of the law and public interests, forces the Soviet mafia elite to live by common rules.
Советского элитария, мафиози, жить по общим правилам.
And there he even has a philosophy: I can, but others can't, because I have access to the deficit.
Имею доступ к дефициту.
He's the maintenance station manager there. Naturally, everyone swans in front of him, everyone fawns, and everything else. But he did not become a principled traffic police inspector. And what does this mafia guy do, so to speak, an elitist?
Мафиози, так сказать.
He, using his connections, begins to spoil a person's life. Moreover, he not only removes it from some kind of transport there, they put it on another one, they remove it from one road, they put it on another. Not only that, he begins to harm him in his personal life. And the sister of this traffic police inspector, who had every reason to be appointed head of the department, thanks to the actions of this elite, at the expense of his interclan relations, he is trying to ensure that she is not appointed head of the department, but put a completely worthless passing figure, but which is convenient for everyone. If only to harm this traffic police inspector. He could not call, this elitist, could not solve it by some kind of turnout, but at the personal clan mafia, clan corporate level, when, according to the principle of you to me, I to you, he achieved this, he solved this problem. This is how the state is destroyed. In fact, what do we see in this film? We see in this film that, based on general principles, this elite has no place in public administration, in the management structure. But since the state itself is being destroyed, these clans manifest themselves. Russian flag, and when they appeared in full, the state collapsed, and the Soviet Union had a red flag over the country. Instead of a sovereign flag, the flag of the subject state of the Russian, the original Russian red flag.
у Советского Союза.
Flag of a subject sovereign state.
Субъектного, суверенного государства.
The colonial flag was immediately raised, indicating that Russia is no longer a sovereign state, that it is just a colony of the West.
Суверенным государством, что это всего лишь колония Запада.
Therefore, there are no these here. There should be no misconceptions. But the main thing is that in this film, here is the breakdown of this main mafia.
Срыв вот этого главного мафиози.
In other words, he is constantly faced with realities where there is no place for clan corporatism, where life itself forces him to be an ordinary person.
Где сама жизнь заставляет его быть обычным человеком.
That is, he cannot dispose of other people's
Не
lives.
может он распоряжаться чужими жизнями.
He must
Он
live in
должен,
harmony with
жить
other
в
people.
гармонии с другими людьми.
He
Он
can't
не
dominate
может,
anyone
над
there,
кем-то там
and he doesn't want
господствовать,
to.
а он не хочет,
He
он
wants to
хочет
dominate,
господствовать.
and he
И
faces
с
it.
этим- И он сталкивается с этим.
And he cannot overcome, he sees that he cannot overcome the system of this public state, even at its end. Even at the end of these, at the beginning of the 80s, when it became clear to everyone that it was necessary to change life in the country, that these clan corporate mafia groups were being purposefully cultivated, which it is necessary to clean up, that this is all to change. And that's why perestroika was supported, so that society would be cleansed of rot. Here, and as a result of the fact that society did not have its own structures and management systems, the state fell into colonial slavery to the West as a result of the betrayal of the party nomenclature, and the country was destroyed. So that's what this main character has.
Что у этого главного героя?
His nervous tension was constantly growing.
Росло нервное напряжение.
This
Это
tension grew, grew.
росло.
And so he comes to someone's birthday party, and therefore the people who gathered for this birthday, it's just a joke.
И там, для людей, которые собрались на этот день рождения, это всего лишь шутка.
They find a
Они
man who poses
находят
as a traffic
человека,
police
который
inspector.
изображает из себя инспектора ГАИ.
It's a
Для
joke
них
to them.
это шутка.
But this
Но
joke turned out to be the
эта
last drop in the
шутка
glass,
оказалась
and this main
последней
character
каплей в
has a nervous
стакане.
breakdown.
И у этого главного героя происходит нервный срыв.
He starts
Он
performing,
начинает
he starts
выступать,
insulting everyone.
он начинает всех оскорблять.
They
И
say
ему
to
там
him
говорят,
there,
ну,
well,
ты
you are the
это
very
самое,
thing.
ну, ты,
Well,
конечно,
of
Бог,
course, you are God in
в,
this very
это
thing.
самое,
You have a
у тебя
service
станция
station, but
техобслуживания,
there are other
есть же
gods
и
on this
другие
sinful
боги
earth.
на этой грешной земле.
There
Там
I
вот
am
я
the
там,
director of a
директор
supermarket there.
универсама,
I
у
also
меня
have a
тоже
deficit,
дефицит есть,
and
и
you
ты
also
тоже
come to me
ко мне
for this
приходишь за
deficit.
этим дефицитом,
Not
не только
only
я
am I
тебе.
here for
Мы
you,
здесь
but we are
собрались, потому
gathered
что мы
here,
каждый
because
может
we can
что-то
each
друг
provide
другу
something to
предоставить.
each
Мы
other.
все такие.
We are all like that.
Надо
We have to
иметь.
have,
Нам
society
общество всё
opposes
противостоит,
everything
но
to
между
us,
собой-то
but we
мы
have to put
должны
up with each other
мириться.
there.
Мы
We have to
должны
remove
вот
all
эти
these
все
contradictions.
противоречия
And here you start
снимать.
fighting
А
against
ты тут
everyone.
начинаешь воевать против всех.
I'm telling
Я
this to the
это
fact that the
рассказываю
breakdown of the
тому,
mask is the
что
same as that of
срыв
this very hero.
маска, он тот же самый, что и вот у этого самого героя.
In other
То есть
words, the tension that he
напряжение,
experienced during the
которое
management,
он
when faced with the
испытывал
real environment,
при
led
проведении
him to this very
управления,
nervous breakdown,
сталкиваясь
which
с
was
реальной
expressed in this
средой,
public controversy with Trump.
привело его к этому самому нервному срыву, которое и выразилось вот в этой публичной полемике с Трампом.
Therefore,
Поэтому
realizing that he is a member of the team,
понимая, что
as in
он
the
член
movie,
команды,
also the
как
gods are all
в
there.
фильме, тоже боги там все.
In other
То есть вот
words,
эта команда,
this team formed by
сформированная
globalists
глобальщиками
around Trump,
вокруг
the Trump
Трампа,
team,
команда
they
Трампа,
immediately began
они
to say
сразу
that
же
we should
стали
calm down.
говорить, что мы успокоимся.
Johnson
Джонсон
is the
там,
chairman of the Congress
этот,
there. He
председатель
immediately said,
Конгресса-то,
I sent a lot of
он же
sums,
сразу сказал,
a lot of
я отправил
information
массу
to Elon
СМС,
Musk.
массу информации Илону Маску.
I hope he
Надеюсь, он
reads, he
почитает,
calms
он
down, and makes a
успокоится и
decision.
примет решение.
J.
Джей
Devens,
Дивенс,
the vice president, immediately
вице-президент,
declares,
тоже заявляет
and several
несколько
times,
раз,
that
что
right now I
сейчас,
hope,
надеюсь,
I do not
я не
know how
знаю,
it will
как там
be,
будет, но
but I
надеюсь,
hope
что
that Musk will
сейчас
calm down now,
успокоится и
and he will return to the team, we will continue to
он
work.
вернется в команду, будем продолжать работать.
And immediately, many other Republicans, other people tied to communicating with Musk, began to work to extinguish the conflict.
Люди начали работать на то, чтобы погасить конфликт.
Maybe this conflict, so conditionally the conflict of Trump and Musk.
Условно, конфликт Трампа и Маска.
It should be understood that in clan corporate groupings, there is always this tension.
Есть вот это самое напряжение.
They are always forced to sort it out one way or another. And that is why in Russia, Putin is this mediator and resolves interclan conflicts. And in the United States, Trump was not capable of this resolution, and everything is being solved there at the shadow level. And that's why Trump, because he fell for this conflict with Musk, everything broke through, became public. But it was immediately extinguished. And pay attention, as soon as in the morning this mask subsided, this nervous outburst occurred. Then immediately Trump's negotiators and an excuse no one appointed them. These are the shadow ones, representing the shadow management structures of the clan corporate, which came out with a certain. That's how Putin is a mediator, so the shadow mediator in the United States started working with Musk and Trump. And they immediately stopped calling each other names. Musk deleted all his such accusations of Trump and everything else. And he said, released a post, everything can end in the most unexpected, funny way. He showed it right away. In other words, everyone hopes that there will be a certain reconciliation. In a crowd of elite society, especially when Americans today have someone as an enemy, and someone there is your friend. It changes for you tomorrow because your interests have changed. This is a common thing. Remember, Lindsey Graham spoke against Trump, then spoke for Trump, and now again against Trump. And so it always is. So, look at how Elon Musk is technically taken out from under such a blow to explain. Suddenly, they started talking about the fact that he has some dependence on drugs. Here, although here Musk's father is absolutely right, who said that he has post-traumatic stress disorders. That is, he really had a nervous breakdown from overexertion. Because the shadow mediator does not effectively solve these interclan problems. And there are global tasks that need to be solved. They thought that Musk would do it, but he also failed to do it publicly. That's why he was brought to this level. But it is left at this level, so the golden key. And now we have a correspondent in the United States, Valentin Bogdanov. And he immediately asked a question. We are waiting for Musk to return the key to Trump. In other words, he immediately showed a certain level of understanding of state and supranational governance. So, it's all being removed, and the topic itself is gradually fading. And he is accused of drugs. They say it's a breakdown. Remember, he publicly smoked marijuana on camera. And what's the point? To the fact that at the time when he was doing this, a campaign was being conducted across the states to legalize light drugs. In particular, smoking marijuana. And Musk was charged with solving this problem.
проблемы.
and he
И
had
он
to
должен
perform.
был выступить.
And in
И
a
в
society where
обществе,
drug use is now
где
practically not a crime to be convicted,
употребление наркотиков сейчас практически не является преступлением, подлежащим осуждению,
the recognition that his
обоснование,
nervous
что его
breakdown was
нервный срыв был
drug-related,
связан
he is
с
quite
наркотиками,
acceptable.
он вполне приемлем.
Well,
Ну вот
here's
как
how
вот
we
у нас,
have, for
например,
example,
ну
well,
извините,
sorry, the fool
дурак
was
был
drunk,
пьяный,
he got
вот
drunk,
напился, ну
well,
вот
he
проспался,
overslept, he
человеком
became a
стал.
man. This is
Вот
about the
это
same
примерно та
situation
же
that the
самая
mask is
ситуация,
being
в
brought into
которую
now.
сейчас выводят именно маска.
Why are we
Почему
forced to solve all these
так
problems like
вынуждены
this?
решать вот эти вот все проблемы?
There are no
Кадров
frames.
нет.
Well,
Ну не
there are not enough
хватает
personnel
кадров для
to
того,
solve the
чтобы решать
tasks of
задачи
state and
государственного
supranational management.
управления.
Trump's
В
team brought together
команду
completely
Трампа
different people.
собрали совершенно разных людей.
People who have
Людей,
worked
которые
in various
работали в
other
разных
programs,
других
people who
программах,
are personally
людей,
incompatible.
которые личностно несовместимы.
And
И
now they will
сейчас
have
их
to be
надо
brought
будет
together
еще
somehow,
между собой
somehow shuffled
как-то
according to their
свести,
positions in
как-то
such a way
перетасовать по
that a workable
должностям
team has
таким
developed.
образом, чтобы сложилась работоспособная команда.
The team is
Команда
still being
еще только
formed.
складывается.
But when I
А
repeat
вот
again what I have
когда,
already said,
повторю снова то, что я уже говорил.
I repeat, and
Повторяю,
the
а
fact
то,
that there is to get
что там
out is not
выкручиваться,
to
не
get out.
выкручиваться.
When exactly the
Когда
expulsion begins,
начнется
when the rejection of
именно
one or the other goes,
изгнание,
as it was with
когда
Manaforth and
пойдет
others in
отказ
Trump's
от
former
того или
team, as
иного,
if his first
как это было
presidential
с
term,
Манафортом и
that's when the
другими
crisis
в
comes.
прежней команде Трампа, как в его первый президентский срок, вот тогда наступает кризис.
And
А
while they are
пока
dealing with
они
issues
вот
like this,
занимаются
when
вот
they move from
такими
place to place,
вопросами,
when they
когда
try to resolve
передвигают
this
с места на
conflict,
место,
to measure
когда
it in
они
some way,
пытаются
it
разрешить
means that
этот
there is a working
конфликт, его
process on
каким-то
team
образом
formation.
замирить, то это означает, что идет рабочий процесс по формированию команды.
Therefore,
Поэтому
there is no
никакого
performance
спектакля
here.
здесь нет.
The performance is caused by a nervous breakdown. Again, I recommend that you look at the traffic police inspector for understanding.
Инспектор ГАИ.
Very.
Очень.
Although there is a clash of the mafia with the national state with a public initiative.
С общественной инициативой.
But nevertheless,
Но, тем не менее,
Musk has about the same situation.
У Маска примерно такая же ситуация.
You see, when he, through his dodge, came into conflict with a lot of clan corporate groups, when they began to pull him apart in different directions, when they began to create problems for him in all directions, when he was forced to resign from public office as a result of this pressure, when as a result of what they had to give the new impulse of NASA, clan corporate groups, others clung on and did not allow it. There are a lot of things invested.
В результате того, что они должны были придать новый импульс НАСА, кланово-корпоративные группировки, другие вцепились и это не позволили, там много чего вложено.
That is, you know, drip, 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 drip.
Капало.
And at a certain stage, it all fell apart.
Все это сорвалось.
But he understands perfectly well his level in supranational governance and Trump's level. And so, naturally, it flew out of him in this nervous breakdown. If it wasn't for me, he wouldn't be president. If it wasn't for that, I'm this very thing. Trump is 3.5 years old, and I will be here for another 40 years. That is, it all comes from him. But the fact is that it is impossible to replace Trump either. He can't be changed to J. Devens right now. Because there are not enough people. What is lacking is precisely the managerial impact that this supranational management of the global elite can produce on the United States, on the country's elite, and on the whole world. Everyone is needed here.
Глобальной элиты, на Соединенные Штаты, на страновую элиту и на весь мир. Здесь все нужны.
Trump was specially raised for the task of a statesman.
Под задачу государственного деятеля.
And after 4 defaults, they conducted to look at his stress resistance and how he gets out.
Как он выкручивается.
They created before him.
Yes,
Yes, he was not created. This servant of the people was not filmed, like Zelensky, but he was purposefully brought out, that he would be the head of state. It doesn't sound like the first year. And it sounded even when even Trump himself did not express his such presidential ambitions. I mean, it's a long job. And Trump's loss means a lot for supranational governance. Breaking Greases means a lot to public administration, which is why they do it all. And then everything will be presented as it should be. Well, it happened like this. Or there are drugs. I'm sorry. Well, such a breakdown has happened. I won't do it anymore. But Pete hexed him that here he is an alcoholic. Well, I don't drink. I will continue to work. That's it. So is Trump. This is Musk too. Well, that's it. Well, so it happened. So it happened. But the main thing is that everyone who is tied to this conflict understands perfectly well that there was a nervous breakdown from the overstrain of the problems that collapsed on Musk, which were arranged by the American country elites. It's like a lot of these little dogs that are clinging on from all sides and creating problems. And he needs to save projects. Those are high-tech. These projects will collapse. The United States will collapse. Country elites do not understand. And over the state administration, the reformatting of the United States is needed. In general, this is very short on the conflict that has happened with Trump and Lube. In order to understand more precisely, in order to delve into these problems, I will repeat again what I said from the very beginning. It is necessary to read the work of the internal predictor. It's the frames that decide everything. These are the principles of the personnel policy of the state, the anti-state, that is, the mafia, public initiative, that is, conciliarity, the work of the three-volume war on the state Bolshevism, where what is the state, what is supranational governance, what is state governance and other related, and what is state symbols in general. These are state symbols and state sovereignty. These works are directly related to what is happening in the United States. And what happens in Russia if we don't sort this out? And what are we getting now? Political scientists, they see personalities everywhere. They don't see this management of state and supranational management. But again, I repeat, this is very short on this topic. There are a lot of points that need to be covered in detail here. That's all for today. Well, we can only say goodbye and remind you that many things are incomprehensible to us, not because our concepts are weak, but because these things are not included in the circle of our concepts. And in this regard, it must be understood that if earlier it was enough for a person to be able to read, write, and count, in order to take place as a person and a citizen, at present, in order to take place as a person and a citizen, it is necessary to know how the complex social supersystems of the state are managed. Such knowledge is given only in one source, in the works of the internal predictor of the USSR. For the current complex, strong maneuver that is taking place all over the world, and not only in Russia, we have prepared a work called War, the State, Bolshevism. 3 volumes. The first volume is The State, which explains that not all states are states, how a historical state differs from a designed state, what a designed state is, and many other concepts. The second volume is War. War is a set of measures aimed at seizing other people's energy, natural and human resources. And it is this definition that is the only true one for defining war. It is in this volume that it is explained how wars are fought and how some countries win and capture other countries without fighting on the battlefields. The example of the Soviet Union, how it collapsed without any battles, shows that it is possible to achieve victory without fighting. The third volume is Bolshevism. Russian Bolshevism, a unique phenomenon of Russian culture, has always, at all times, saved Russia. That is why Bolshevism is so hated by all the enemies of Russia. That is why all the opponents of Bolshevism unite with Hitler and with other enemies in order to prevent Russia from taking place as a subject sovereign state. In addition to this 3-volume book, our partners have published a book of analytical notes from the series about the world of curved mirrors Fleetov. These analytical notes expand the content of what is set out in this 3-volume book. And they also published an additional volume to the first and second editions of the now existing third edition of the War of the State of Bolshevism. In other words, the additional volume includes to a greater extent those materials that are missing in the first, second edition, and are now present in the third edition. The book State Symbols and State Sovereignty was also written. That's how in the army, through the insignia of various servicemen, one can understand his place in the armed forces, his status, his capabilities, and in the 13th century to the 20th century, a system of state flags was built, which determines the world hierarchy of states, in what status, with what capabilities the state is in this world. And it is possible to understand why the native Russian red flag is, the flag of the USSR, is the flag of a subject, absolutely sovereign state, and the current state flag of the white-blue-red tricolor is the flag of a non-subject, non-sovereign colonial state. That is, an appendage of the raw material appendage of the West. In addition, our partners publish a series of conceptual knowledge libraries. The first volume is about the economy, which shows how the economy really works, and it is possible to understand what the central bank and other followers are doing, so that Russia remains a raw material appendage of the West. The second volume is about imitation and provocative activity. Currently, there are a lot of public opinion leaders who lead their audience in one direction or another. And there is often disappointment that it turns out that the leader of public opinion is not who he pretended to be. So, the work of argumentative and provocative activity will just help to figure out whether the person to whom he presents himself, or whether he is just an image of this person, but in fact does some other activity. The next volume is a fairly general theory of management. This is the backbone of the concept of public safety. The next volume of Ida Pushkin is about the conceptual content of Pushkin's work. Adjacent to it is the volume matrix of the matrix discord. This is about matrix management. The next book is a collection of analytical notes on fascism. It's called World Fascism. In fact, this is a reissue of the collection of 1923 year, when fascism was already theorized and described in its entirety. The The next volume is about how to live like a human being, how the economy and society functioned during Stalin's time. And now our partners have published the following book. This is about the introduction to analytics. This work just allows you to understand what analytics is, how to implement it. Examples are given, for example, of how, using the cultural characteristics of one or another people, management is carried out from the supranational level. Practical recommendations on how to develop your analytical skills are given. Specific examples of how to solve are given. Specific tasks are given so that, by solving these tasks, it is possible to develop one's analytical abilities. There are also examples of how brainstorming is carried out, so to speak, using the unsuspecting population, in order to carry out state and supranational governance. And through this you will understand a lot of things, and the purpose of various TV series, and the so-called Zhirinovsky phenomenon, and much, much more. By solving the recommended tasks, you will be able to develop analytical skills and become an independent manager. I can only say goodbye, wish you all the best, peaceful sky over your head, happiness. Until the next meetings.